I've had Silicon Valley tech companies engage me. And when I get to the V, as in violence, some of them say, well, we don't allow violence in our culture. We don't talk about it. We don't say the word. We don't. That's great. But when somebody from outside your culture brings violence to your doorstep, if you're not prepared for it, you're just a victim. I flat out tell them you're irresponsible and you're negligent in taking care of your employees if you don't teach them how to properly prepare to react, respond, and counter an active shooter if it happens.
Mike, thanks for joining me today.
Rob, thanks for having me.
Now, one of the things that we were talking about just ahead of hitting record on this episode wasn't so much the story that inspired you to get into this business altogether, but the story that kind of inspired you to reinvigorated your interest in working in active shooter training. And I just kind of wanted to hear that again and repeat that for the audience, because I thought it was really fascinating.
Sure. So you're referring to Liz Moreno's story. In 2013, I created the program. I started teaching it in 2014. In 2017, I got an email the first week of October 2017 from a lady named Liz Moreno. And I read the email and it said, hey, Mr. Julian, you probably don't remember me, blah, blah, blah. 2.5 years ago, you came to my work and you taught all the employees your program. And I thought it was fine, but I hadn't thought about it a day since until on October 1st, 2017, at the Mandalay, concert, the Route 91 Country Music Festival. She said, we were kind of in front of the stage, surrounded by people. We're watching Jason Aldean, having a great time. All of a sudden, we heard what we thought was firecrackers, and we thought some smart aleck lit some firecrackers in the crowd. She said, but then people became very agitated and stirred, and they started moving around. And she goes, I turned around and saw a woman shot in the face and a man shot in the chest right behind me. She said, obviously, at that point, I knew it was a very dire situation. My boyfriend and I immediately hit the ground like everybody else around us. And she said, at that moment, as I'm covering my head, I realized, wait a minute, I have had training. I know what to do. And she said, I became calm. I turned to my boyfriend. I said, we've got to go. And he said, no, we've got to stay here and shelter in place. And she said, no, I know what to do. I've been trained on this and I'm leaving with or without you. So he said, okay. So Stephen Paddock, the shooter, stopped shooting to switch guns or reload. And they jumped up and grabbed hands and took off running. When he started shooting, they took cover, and then same thing, they took off running. They got back to safety. And she said this. Well, I of course reached out to her and I said, wow, this is an amazing story. I'd love to meet you and hear everything. So she came to my office, told me the whole story. It was very emotional for her. She says, I have not been able to talk about this since it happened. She spilled it, but she was emotional. I got a little choked up. And she looked me in the eye and said, I believe that your training saved my life, because I've got a picture that I show in my training of the field in front of the stage littered with dead bodies. And she may be right. She may have actually been one of those people, because he continued shooting for several more minutes after they took off running. So, as a parent, the most profound moment in my life is when my 2 children were born. The second is when a grown woman looked me in the eye and said, your program saved my life, or something you taught me saved my life. Now, I've been a private investigator and security professional my whole life, since I was 16 years old. Grew up in my father's business. And I was a little burned out, frankly, after that many years. But that completely gave me a new purpose. It hit the reset button. And I went back to, I told my staff, hey, I'm going to focus more on the Alive program, because that was an incredible experience to have someone tell me that. And if I can do it once, I can do it again. And I want to save more lives, because it just proved that the program works. So that's when I kind of hunkered down and said, okay, my staff, you guys take care of the investigations and the EP and the, uniform security. I'm going to spend most of my time on Alive. And I have. And the program has just absolutely taken off. Unfortunately for the world, because it needs it, but fortunately also because it's there and it works. So it's proven concept.
I just love that story, Mike, because not many people have that much meaning behind the work, and we all kind of crave that stuff. And it's just an incredible story. When you were sitting across from her, what was kind of going in through your mind while you were hearing that story?
Well, I was picturing it. Um, so I'm not an empath. I'm not a touchy feely empathetic person, and I can feel people's energy. But what I am fairly, I guess, luckily I'm fairly skilled at is I can kind of put myself in another person's shoes when it comes to their mindset and their thinking, because I'm very analytical and I love the whole psychology. I've studied it my whole life. So I was putting myself in her mind and trying to feel what she felt, the emotions, the adrenaline, the fear, um, and analyze that so I understood it. So I was putting myself in her position and trying to experience it through her eyes. And it was intense, man. I'll tell you, it was intense. But, you know, I always joke that I've never done heroin, but I hear it's very addictive. Well, when somebody tells you you saved my life or something you did save my life, that's addictive. I want more of that. And I tell my instructors, I've got over 180 instructors throughout the world teaching this program. I say, I want all of you to have a story like that, where someone says, hey, you taught me something that completely changed my life or saved my life. Because that's really powerful.
Yeah. Now, Mike, I first saw your work at the Bodyguards for Kids event that Danita and Chris Grow put on a couple of months ago. Friends of the show had them on the podcast a few times, really love their work. And I really enjoyed the presentation that you put on. And what I was really fascinated was your perspective on the differences that you see in how organizations are conducting their training and some of the mistakes that you often see. So I think that would be a great topic for us to dive into today is, that gap between, what do you see organizations doing wrong when they're conducting any kind of active shooters training for their staff?
Um, my the biggest mistake being made is they're pulling punches. They are pussyfooting or candy coating or diluting the impact, the importance, the massive issue that this is, and they're tiptoeing around the violence. Now my program is called ALIVE, and it's an acronym. It's assess, leave, impede, violence, and expose. And I've had Silicon Valley, tech companies talk to me and to engage me, and they want to know more about the program. And when I get to the V, as in violence, some of them say, well, we don't allow violence in our culture. So we don't talk about it. We don't say the word. We don't, I say, well, that's great. But like YouTube, when somebody from outside your culture brings violence to your doorstep, if you're not prepared for it, you're just a victim. So I flat out tell them you're irresponsible, and you're negligent in taking care of your employees if you don't teach them how to properly prepare to react, respond, and counter an active shooter if it happens. That's my biggest one. And I will tell them from the highest rooftop, shame on you. You can be all lovey-dovey and whatever you want to be, but if it comes down to, your distaste for violence, meaning you don't teach people to prepare for it, then shame on you.
It's just kind of an interesting contrast. I'm so too, because I do work at a tech company where there is usually the kind of philosophy, and I know HR might be listening to this podcast. We have sessions on nonviolent communications and things like that. And for the day-to-day stuff, if that's how companies want to run their business, fine. But like you're saying, in the context of this specific situation, you're not preparing your staff properly if you're not. It doesn't allow the message to sink in necessarily from my perspective. If you're not willing to dive into those details.
Yeah.
What are some of the other unintended consequences that might happen as a result of, kind of like you said, pulling your punches and trying to protect your staff from the reality of the situation?
Well, I mean, the most obvious is just not preparing them, not getting their minds thinking, not preparing them for the reality. This is a reality, and whether they want it to be or not, it is. So you can ignore it all you want, but it doesn't make it go away. And if you're not prepared for it, see, I always say the worst time to create a plan is when you need it. And if they're not preparing for the reality of this type of violence, they're not going to have a plan. And they're going to be so shocked and so sensitive Now, in my program, I show, in the longer program, when I have time, I show some case study videos about different active shooter events and what their motives were. There's three motives. And so I give, example of all three. And I don't do it to shock them, but I do it to show them the reality of it. And it's not, I don't want to desensitize them. I want to toughen their skin a little bit, because if something scares you so badly that you lock up and you can't, your brain freezes and doesn't tell your body to run, hide, or fight, that's a bad thing. And the biggest part of my program, or the biggest difference between my program and most, is we teach equal parts of mindset and method. Run, hide, fight is great. It was the first version 25 years ago. They made it, but the first version of anything is never perfect. It talks about the physical functionality of survival, and that's running, hiding, fighting. That's all body. But if your brain is not prepared to tell your body to run, hide, fight, because, we've got those 3 F's in response to violence, fight, flight, or freeze. And freeze is absolutely unacceptable. Nothing good can come of freezing. You might as well just say, hey, here I am, shoot me. I'm ready to go. And that's not okay. I tell my students, I literally say, I forbid you from freezing. Not that I have any power over them, but there are certain personality types that will remember in that situation, well, Mike said he forbids me, so I guess I'll just not freeze and I'll do something. And something is better than anything most of the time in a situation like this.
So just to make sure I have this straight, then, so the kind of the first iteration, and I've heard this a million times from any kind of articles on this topic, is it's like you said, the first iteration: run, hide, fight. That's being taught, and big part of what your training is kind of runs counter to it. It's an improvement on some of that stuff that has been taught before. Can you tell me a few more details about how your training and how your approach kind of differs from what's generally taught?
Sure. We refer to Alive as Run, Hide, Fight 2.0. It's the new and improved version. So, as I said, Run, Hide, Fight is all physical. What we have to do, many people in a situation like this, they see people dying. They go, that guy has a gun, he's shooting. I have nothing to defend myself. And they just, they surrender into this victim-like mindset. They say, well, there's no way I can survive this, so I guess I'll die. And that's unacceptable. You have a choice, and you have the power to change the outcome if you decide to do so. It doesn't mean, it's not a guarantee you're going to survive, but your chances are a hell of a lot better of surviving if you fight back. So many people, just like I said, they resign themselves to the fact that they're going to die. Absolutely not. In fact, become the aggressor, lean forward, take action, forward action. You're going to die if you do nothing. You might very well change the outcome. Maybe you'll get wounded, maybe you'll die, but good chance you might overcome the aggressor, especially if everybody's working the same way with the same training, the same mindset. If you take 11 people from that have never played football together and you put them on the line, as opposed to 11 players that play together all the time, the players that play together are always going to be better. And so you need to understand how to do what you need to do. That's why, I've had companies say, hey, well, we've got 300 employees, but we'd like you to come in and train our executive staff. And I say, so are the lives of your line workers not as important as your executive staff? What happens if one of your, executives is somewhere and there's a bunch of line workers there and they don't have the training? Now it's chaos. Everybody needs to learn, drill, practice, train together, and the same way.
I love that answer. What was kind of popping into my head there with what, like you were talking about with the mental survival mindset, it was exactly like listening to a Survivor Man episodes. I don't know if you've seen that show from like 10 years ago or whatever.
What was it?
Survivor Man. He was this Canadian guy who would go out into the woods or various situations all over the world. And the most important thing was just that survival mentality of having that will to live in those dangerous situations. And what he would talk about a lot is, like I said, a lot of people just giving up and it sounds like it's the exact same kind of mentality that you need to develop when you're stuck in an active shooter situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And, John McCain, the politician, he ran for president, but he was a war hero. The guy was a prisoner of war during Vietnam. In his book, he said that there was several of them, in the prisoners of war. And he said, the ones that didn't make it are the ones that gave up hope. He said, some of us just refused to give up hope because we're too stubborn or whatever. And that's true. As soon as you give up hope, you have surrendered to fate instead of deciding, wait a minute, I'm going to make a difference here. So my program is very, very, very much about empowerment. It's empowering you to understand and realize that you can change the outcome if you do something. Empowerment to never give up hope. Empowerment to become the aggressor. Empowerment to keep your, to be thinking rationally instead of emotionally. When you think of when you react emotionally, oftentimes either you can become paralyzed or you become hysterical. You can't think properly. And that's why my book's called 10 Minutes to Live. In my research, I found that 90+% of all active shooter events in history lasted exactly 10 minutes or less. In fact, 69% are over in 5 minutes or less. What does that mean? We know statistically it's going to be over in a certain amount of time. 10 being the very longest amount, 10 minutes, but probably over in 5 minutes. So if this has been going on a minute or two, keep the faith, keep hope, see the finish line. It's only 2 or 3 minutes away. I can survive for 2 or 3 minutes. You never, ever, ever lose hope.
Yeah. It's not an active battlefield situation where you have no idea how long this is going to go on. There's probably emergency services. There's probably police coming very
Absolutely.
shortly. Most of the time, these guys are going to get taken out at some point. So like you said, like 5-10 minutes is all the window that you need to keep motivated.
Absolutely.
What other kind, because there's kind of 3 different things that I kind of want to take this conversation down now. I want to talk about, because I think we can go 3 different directions. The kind of mental training that you talk about with people, the physical things of what you can do, and then also I kind of want to make this more higher level for people that might be doing training within organizations. So are there any other kind of mental tricks that you teach people that attend your courses of what they can do to not freeze in those situations?
Yeah, well, and it's I do tell them it's a trick. Look, our minds are just absolutely amazing. They can do so many wonderful things. They can do so many terrible things if we don't know how to not let them do terrible things. So they can be our worst enemy if we want. So when I break down the 5 steps of Alive and I talk about the assess process, which is the very first step, that is the only step that is pretty much all psychological, all mental. The rest are all physical. But it's also the most important step because it is the one that is going to set the pace for everything that happens after that. So part of what I do, and part of the reason I when I explain it, I say, I literally use my hands. Okay, when you hear shots and you realize it's a shooter, take a deep breath and you focus. Now I use my hands like this because I create a funnel and I say, this is your funnel and this is everything, the emotions, the physical, everything that's going on goes into this funnel and it comes down and it comes out. Focus, laser focus on survival, on what you're going to do next, which means you're blocking out the distractions of the faces of your children thinking, I'm never going to see them again. My loved ones, dogs and cats, whatever it is, I'm never going to see them again. So obviously the breath is to get oxygen to our vital organs because they're starving from the adrenaline making your heart pump 3 times faster. But I tell everybody, take a deep breath, get some oxygen, focus, and then focus on what your next steps are. And it's literally, I'm trying to get people to remember this one step with a visual and an audible memory so that they don't get sidetracked and they don't get distracted by the fear, by the chaos. So that's kind of a trick. Also the 10-minute thing. I wanted to come up with, I'm a big goal guy. I like SMART goals, right? It's got to be measurable. It's got to be timely. It's got to be attainable. So I I want people to immediately set a goal of survival when something like this happens. So they're focused on the positive, on taking action. They're not distracted by the negative and then falling into that victim mentality and surrendering to whatever fate they think is in store. So that's if that answers your question, that's kind of my little tricks to get people to stay focused where they need to be instead of getting distracted.
Well, I think, and that's a great answer, Mike. And I think it's just what's kind of unique about your training. And it's so important because, like you said, you freeze in that situation. Doesn't matter what else you've been taught after that. Nothing's going to happen. And that happens so often. You hear about in these active shooter situations where it's the people just froze. So like you said, that's absolutely foundational to the rest of the steps. Kind of want to go on now to number 2. What are the sort of physical things that you tell people to do once they've kind of collected themselves and prepared themselves mentally for the next 5 minutes? What do you recommend that they do next?
Well, it depends on whatever step they're taking. If they're taking the L in Alive is leave, which is like run, but I don't like run because it's what we do when the boogeyman's chasing us, and it's not empowering. Leaving is it's a way of thinking about calmly extracting yourself from the danger, get off the
More proactive.
Yeah. Oh, 100% more proactive, as is impede instead of hide. So I talk about, how you might want to, if you can leave, keeping cover and concealment, keeping things between you and the shooter. If they can see you, but you're leaving, you're going in the opposite direction. If it's the impede process, I talk about impede creating time and space. Now, these killers, based on their psychology, they know that, in fact, my definition of an active killer is a person engaged in killing or trying to kill as many people possible in a short amount of time as possible. I think the government should change it to that, because I think that really gets to the core of what they're doing and what their purpose is. So if you can create time and space by any means possible, if you create even a clunky little barricade that's going to take them 3 minutes to get through, they're not going to waste those 3 precious minutes and opportunity to take lives, because they know law enforcement is on the way. They know the window of opportunity is closing. They're going to move on to easier targets. So that's physically something, but the violence portion is the physical part. I believe that human beings are not born violent. I believe we learn violence. I think we know how to kill to survive so we can eat. But when it comes to violence, I believe that that's something that we learn. A lot of my students are not comfortable with violence. They don't understand violence. They've never experienced violence as an aggressor or a victim. So I try and get people into the mindset. In fact, I have an exercise that I call, "Can you take another human life?" And I always ask people, can you take another human life? And about every 3rd or 4th training session we do, somebody will raise their hand, or multiple people. And then I do this exercise where I take them down this journey where I basically put them in a position to where I'm a bad guy and I'm about to kill somebody they care about, and I'm going to count to 3. And all they have to do is, before I get to 3, they pull their little finger trigger and kill me. And nobody has ever gotten to 3 and not pulled the trigger. So I want to prepare people psychologically for doing whatever it takes. Also in the program, we talk about how to, render a semi-automatic weapon unusable by, making sure that it jams. I talk about using a pen to stab it through their eyeball into their brain to disrupt the electrical signals so that they are no longer a threat. I want people to understand this right here, this pen right here could save their life. And again, I get into the psychology things. If somebody walks through the door and you just start going at them with the eyes, our brain immediately goes into survival mode and stops every other thought and action except to protect the eyeballs, which is the sense that we use more than anything. So now as a shooter, I'm on the defensive. I probably dropped the gun and I'm on the defensive trying to protect my eyes, and you're trying to stab me. Now you're the aggressor. I've completely turned the tables, and that's where we want That's where we want an aggressor, someone violent that's trying to hurt us. So that's the physical of those 3 steps.
What the common theme that I kind of noted throughout the entire answer that you've given so far is, and what I find very interesting about your training, it's very emotional, and there's a lot of stories and there's a lot of visuals to kind of make this training stick. And this is part of the conversation because I know we have a lot of security leaders that are doing a lot of training for their staff or the organizations that they might be consulting for. And, the common challenge is, how do you make these things stick? How do you actually get people to remember this stuff? Like, forget a couple of years from now when there might be an event, like next week, 2 weeks from now, because it's usually a very boring activity that people kind of have to sit through. And that's what I really find quite interesting about your approach, is that it's very emotional, it's very visual, and it just sounds to me like an incredible lesson to get people to actually remember this stuff a couple of weeks down the road.
So, good question. Thank you. Well, there's one: passion and energy. I tell my instructors, we have a 2-day instructor certification course, and I tell them, when we go through the section on how to present, how to deliver, and how to engage your audience so it does stick, I tell them that you're a motivational speaker. You need to Anthony Robbins these people and get them so charged up and full of energy that will be connected to the memory of what to do. So if they're ever in that situation, not only are they now remembering what they were taught, but the energy that is associated with that, what they learned, comes back into them, and it empowers them. So I say, listen, you need your energy to be so big that it's infectious. I want people to feel your energy. I want them full of your energy. So when they walk out of that training room, they're like, hell yeah, I can defend myself. Damn right, I've got confidence. No, I'm not helpless. No, I won't lose hope. I'm not going to let someone take me away from the people I love. Okay. It's about owning it. It's about moving forward. It's about taking action. There is no victim mentality or anything in this program. We don't accept it. It's not okay. It doesn't happen. So it's just, honestly, one word I would have to say is energy, and people remember it. I don't have people fall asleep in my class. I'll tell you that, because as you can tell, I'm pretty passionate, because it goes back to the reason I created this program. I was pissed. I was angry. I was frustrated seeing good people die at the hands of bad people and watching them do nothing or the wrong thing. And it's like watching a horror movie and you're saying, don't go through that door. Don't open that door. And you want to stop them. I want people to understand that they don't have to die. They can change the outcome. They can make a difference. They just don't know it part of the time. I want to convince them of how powerful and empowered they are, so that when the poo-poo hits the oscillator, they go into survival mode and they take care of business.
All right, Mike, we're coming up at all the time I promised to steal from you today. What's the main takeaway you want listeners to remember from our conversation?
Probably my last little diatribe, my last statement. I don't care who you are. And, it's been very, very gratifying to me. I've had special forces guys. I've had career military. I've had law enforcement go through my course. And the feedback has always been, I know how to defend myself. I know how to protect others. But the mindset that so many people lack, you have got to have a certain way of thinking. And people that lose their fortune and then make it all back have a certain way of thinking. Conor McGregor and people that are world-class combat athletes have a way of thinking. You just have to change your mind. You have to set your mind to survival. And the two, I wish we had more time because I have so much to say. The two mindsets I teach are security mindset, survival mindset. Security mindset is prior to the incident happens, and then you go into survival mindset. It's just about taking control and having the power to do what is necessary to survive a situation like that.
All right, Mike. Well, that was certainly, I think, the highest energy podcast that I've recorded on Talking Threat Intelligence yet. Love the episode. How can listeners get in touch if they want to learn more about your work?
The website is activeshootersurvivaltraining.com. We've got online, 1, 2, and 3 hour online programs. We do webinars. We do in-person training all over the world. Like I said, I've got instructors from Mexico City to Australia to Toronto, Canada. We teach instructor certification class every single month. So we're adding 10 to 50 new instructors every month. But activeshootersurvivaltraining.com is the best way to find us. It's a website, and then you can reach out to us anyway through the website.
All right, Mike, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Rob.